Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. For today's video, I'll be taking you through the process of this illustration that really made me reevaluate how I approach using watercolors in my work. So how this illustration came about is I was looking for a painting idea and I was sketching around in my sketchbook but not really being able to come up with anything. And whenever I am in that state of wanting to paint something but I don't know what to paint and I just can't come up with any ideas on the spot, I like to look through my old sketchbooks and look for any little nuggets of inspiration, anything that kind of sparks an idea, anything that inspires me to flesh things out further. And I came across this little sketch that I had done a long time ago, and it's not a great drawing, like obviously the anatomy is just really whack, but there was something about this sketch that I really liked at the time. I think I really just liked the idea of her big wavy hair cascading down and draping over the moon. And I really liked the kind of serene feeling that I got from the gesture and the expression of the character. And so when I came across this old sketch, I felt inspired to flesh it out further and turn it into a painting. So that's how this illustration came about. I ended up adding two little cat character friends to give the character a little bit more context, to give the picture a little bit more meaning to it, I guess, a little bit more interest as well. So once I finally landed on my final drawing, I transferred it onto my Arches hot press watercolor block, and I went into the painting thinking that I am going to work primarily in watercolor. I was actually looking at my old primarily watercolor pieces that have this more storybook-like kind of theme to it for inspiration for this piece, because I felt like thematically they were very similar, and I was just trying to pull from those old illustrations that I did. I guess because honestly, I look back at some of my old paintings and I wonder like how I was able to do them, because as some of you guys might know, in recent years, I've been kind of struggling with working in watercolor, and that's why over time I have started to bring in other media like color pencils and gouache over top of it to make watercolor more workable in my process. So anyway, point being is that I wanted this illustration to kind of harken back to my earlier watercolor illustrations. So I started out the painting by laying down a wash of burnt sienna because I wanted that color to come through and give a warm cast to the entire painting. And after laying that down, I went in and started to work on the background first. I wanted the background to be quite loose in comparison to the characters, because I knew I was going to be rendering them quite fully. So I just did a quick kind of wet on wet splashing around of paint for the background. I primarily used the cerulean blue paint for the blue that I was going for, and I decided I was going to mix this color in with every other color that was going to be on the painting so that the colors feel harmonious together. Then after laying down this very quick background layer, I start to work on the characters, and I think this illustration also reminds me of my earlier illustrations because of this closed eyes face. I used to draw this face all the time. So much of my earlier paintings have this kind of expression, and my mom would ask, why do you always draw characters with closed eyes? But there's something about this kind of expression for me. It's just very comforting to draw, and I just feel very connected to it for some reason. So yeah, I really enjoyed rendering this face out, even though I feel like I've done it many times before. So my overall goal for this piece was to really bring out that serene, dreamy feeling that I felt when I was looking at that initial inspiration sketch. So initially, I was having a great time working on this piece. I was having a lot of fun rendering out her face and her hands and everything else. It was really satisfying. The painting started out looking very gentle and whimsical at the start, but as time went on, I started to get a little bit too noodly and using too many layers, I guess, and trying to render a little bit too much, and that resulted in building up a lot of very kind of what I would describe as unpleasant just texture on the surface, and I suspect the reason for that is because of the cerulean blue that I use to mix in with all the colors that I use on the piece. This is a Winsor & Newton cerulean blue that I use, and it is a very highly granulating pigment. And I usually don't care either way whether it's highly granulating or not, but and I think I'm pretty sure I had this problem with this paint before, but because for this piece I used it to mix into every color that I use in the piece, and because I have a painting method where I use a lot of layers to build up the rendering, that resulted in the granulation building up in an unappealing way at the end. So while I like this certain cerulean blue a lot for mixing into different colors with and just using straight, I think by now I should learn that maybe this is not ideal for me to use, especially if I'm going to be using it all over the painting and if I'm going to be using a lot of layers, because it tends to create this very heavily speckled look all over the piece, which leaves a dirty and muddy kind of impression. So even though I kind of caught on to this while I was painting, I was kind of stubborn and I just kept using it and, kept going on the way I usually do. And so it just kind of kept getting worse and worse as I was building up the painting. And looking back at some of the earlier points in this painting's process, I think had I stopped with painting in watercolor earlier on and had just gone straight into using color pencils, I think I could have saved myself hours and hours of just noodling around and not going anywhere. Looking back, I think I could have just left the background as is before I went in with another layer. I had in mind that I needed for it to be darker to first read as if it's nighttime, and to have a dark backdrop that the moon can be light against so that it looks as if it's glowing. But I don't know if that was really necessary, and I need to stop thinking so literally in that in order for something to read as nighttime that it has to be dark in value. I think I really need to let go of that idea. But I kept trucking on, and I made my bed. So when I did go in to darken the background some more, that's kind of when the painting took a turn for me. It went from me liking and enjoying the piece to me getting really frustrated with it and feeling like it was just not going well. Because the background, while it did get darker, I was able to achieve a darker value. The granulation built up even more because I had gone over and put another layer down, and it just created so much ugly contrast, I think, with the darker specks against the lighter paper, which was too distracting, and I felt like I couldn't get a very clear color out of that. Like I really just wanted to lay down a clean blue color, but instead I was getting this really muddy, speckly kind of grayish blue color. Because certain colors with watercolor, you kind of have to get it from the first go. You can't kind of keep adding and layering over top of it, because you're just going to make the color less pure and make it more muddy as you go. And yeah, I just spent a lot of hours thinking I was building up the finish of this piece while I was just making it more and more unappealing. And so finally, after hours and hours of just noodling around and making the piece worse, I decided, you know what? This piece can't get any worse from this point. Let's forget about the vision that I had when I went into this piece of it being primarily in watercolor and it having this kind of light and whimsical, effortless feel to it, to something else. I need to build up another vision for it. Let's bring in the color pencils, because I know that I have a certain level of control with them, that I can use them to bring this garbage to something that hopefully I will like more. So finally threw up my flag or whatever, I surrendered to the piece. And I put aside the watercolors and I brought in my color pencils. And with the color pencils, the first thing I did was go in with the character to smoothen out the texture and render out the features to a better finish and just make the character look better in my eyes. It was just so much easier using the color pencils to smoothen out the ugly texture that I had made with the granulation, and also to kind of punch up the colors that I had dulled down with my many layers of watercolors that I did, which really killed a lot of the colors. So as soon as I brought in my color pencils and I was able to adjust those two things, my colors and my values, and I guess my drawing as well, because I was just able to control my line better, I was back to having so much fun again on this piece, which was a huge relief, and I could see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, because I wasn't 100% sure that I would be able to pull this piece together, but I wanted to test it out by working on the character first and making her as lovable to me in my eyes, like visually, as possible, so that I feel inclined to keep investing time into this piece. Do any of you guys know what I mean by like wanting to make yourself fall in love with the character or whatever you're building up in your painting? Because otherwise you don't really feel invested in continuing to work on the piece. So I really feel like I just pour all my love and energy into that character that I'm working on, so that I feel it gives me the sense of like giddiness when I work on the character. So yeah, I wonder if you guys know what I mean by that. It's a very exciting feeling, and I feel like for me that's most of the joy of painting, when I get to work on the character and I get to really just give it as much life and love as possible, as cheesy as that sounds. So once I got the character to my liking, I felt confident enough to branch out into the other areas of the painting. So I knew I would be bringing the color pencils into pretty much all aspects of the painting, which was really daunting because I already had put in a whole lot of hours into this piece already. And using color pencils is quite a time-consuming process. So I spent a lot of time going over the entire painting with the color pencils, primarily to smoothen out some of the very heavy granulation, the texture that was left behind by the watercolors, to smoothen that out as well, punch up the colors by doing so, because if I get rid of some of the dark like speckliness, it made the colors more solid, and therefore it just made the colors feel more vibrant and pure. So just by smoothing out some of the textures, I feel like it really punched up the colors of the piece. I'm not sure how much of this I will show in the video, but I spent a lot of time with the color pencils in the background, just doing a lot of very gentle, like finessing of the colors, just making the colors smoothly blend in together. I wanted this like smooth transition in the background of going from like a darker blue, like a purpley blue from the top to a lighter cerulean blue to the bottom. And I wanted an interesting kind of border with the clouds, like framing the piece. And so I spent a lot of time carefully designing that with the color pencils, because I just could not do it with the watercolors, and also just creating this nice transition of these different colors so that it just looks more interesting than just a solid color in the background. And it also, I think, gives the whole piece a sense of movement that way. So with the characters fully rendered out and the background established how I want it to be, I felt ready to bring in some what I like to think of as special effects. So you'll see me drawing these random vertical lines all over the piece. Now, I will say that I might have gone a little bit overboard with them. There are a lot of them, I admit, maybe a little bit too much for some, but I really like doing these little vertical lines. I don't know what it is about it. I've been incorporating these kinds of vertical lines in my pieces recently because I really like how it reinforces a sense of movement in the pieces. I feel like it also gives me an opportunity to inject more color into the piece, and by doing so it also gives more context for all of the colors in the piece to like work off from, which makes all the colors in the piece just feel more alive to me. And as a design element, I really like placing them in the piece in a way where I feel like I'm improving on the composition and really controlling how the audience's eyes move around the piece. Maybe one day I will come up with something other than these little vertical lines, but I've been really enjoying incorporating them into my work. Perhaps sometimes going a little bit too far, arguably. But I think for a magical themed piece like this, I think it's acceptable. I think it's fitting. Then the last thing I do in this piece is add in the little stars. Now, I was really conflicted on what to use to draw in the stars. At first, I thought I would have to go in with gouache because I just wasn't sure I would be able to get the color pencils light enough so that they pop off enough and read as these bright stars. But I decided to go in with the color pencils and try that first. And I was pleasantly surprised how well it worked out. I made sure to really sharpen my pencils as sharp as I could get them so that I could have a really fine point. And I realized that they actually didn't need to be quite that light in value for them to read as stars. I kind of like how subtle they are actually. I think if they were any lighter in value, they might have been a bit distracting. I think having them not quite light in value, it actually allowed me to incorporate more color into the stars so that the stars look more colorful as opposed to just like white. I'm actually glad that that's how they came out, because I think had I gone in with gouache, I probably would have gone in a little bit too light and it probably would look a little bit disjointed from the rest of the picture. A lot of you might be wondering why I still bother with watercolor. And sometimes I do ask myself why. I look back at some of my earlier watercolor only paintings and I think, how was I able to do that? Why can't I do it now? But I've spent the last year or so, probably more, being really frustrated with watercolors and stubbornly trying to still make it the backbone of my work. And I'm finally coming around to the idea that maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe that doesn't mean I'm just throwing in the towel and I just suck at watercolors now. Maybe I have a different approach now. That doesn't mean I am a worse painter or a worse draftsman or anything. Maybe it just means I'm trying to achieve some kind of different effect with my work, and using watercolor is not the most effective way to achieve that effect. So I'm wondering now, because I still don't want to totally give up on watercolors, I'm wondering now if I just use watercolors just as a tool for establishing the base colors of things, and then from that point I bring in other mediums like colored pencils or gouache or whatever and build on top of that, instead of trying to do like 90% of the rendering in watercolor alone, because it hasn't been working for me for a while now. So yeah, that's just something that's on my mind and something I'll have to figure out as I go. Once I was done the stars, I really felt like it brought the whole picture together. It made the picture feel complete, and yeah, I think I felt like I was done. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of this piece, because I definitely treated it a little bit differently. I would say I was a lot more line based in this one, which is not my usual inclination. I typically like to kind of leave out the lines and make it look more lineless and more quote unquote painterly. But this time around, I really had a lot of fun accentuating the lines and making the lines really, like, incorporating the lines into the piece more with different colors, if you know what I mean. I've been gearing up for a big shop update pretty soon, so if I decide to make a print of this, I will definitely include it in that shop opening. So that is it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this piece come together. It's taken quite a transformation, but I'm pretty happy with how it looks in the end. I hope you guys like it as well. Make sure to stay tuned for that big shop reopening, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!